In today's episode of Podcasting Secrets, my guest reveals why you need to stop obsessing over download numbers and start thinking of yourself as a brand. In this episode, you'll learn how to repurpose your content, why authenticity trumps polish, and the power of breaking the fourth wall in your interviews. Plus, you can get insider tips on the best podcast conferences and advertising platforms to help accelerate your growth. Unlock the potential of your podcast and transform your approach with Greg's expert advice in today's episode. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Secrets. Today, I'm joined by Greg Wasserman. Greg is the head of relationships for Cast Magic, and he's a podcast coach and consultant. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Anytime to talk to other podcasters about podcasting, I love it.
Greg has run 3 different podcast listening platforms, which has allowed him to work with podcasters from all different types of verticals and sizes. He's also worked with hosting companies and other podcast tech companies to gain insights across the industry. He also works at Cast Magic, which is an AI podcasting and content repurposing platform, helps podcasters save time with their show production and assist in a variety of ways to build their audience and make money. He also speaks on stage at podcast conferences and summits, and he enjoys consulting other podcasters as they shift their mindsets to ensure better success and financial rewards. How'd I do on the introduction?
I mean, great. You read it perfectly. That's so true. And that's we can speak more about what all that means so that people get a little better context. But yeah.
What is your superpower in podcasting? And why did you even get into podcasting in the first place, Greg?
So my background's in media sales. And one of the stints I had was a company I was with got acquired by CBS. So when you get acquired, you're like, where's my lane? We're the new kids at an old company. What do we do? And so podcasting was something that I gravitated towards. You think about radio as the first influencers. You think about influencer marketing, especially being in a background in media. You understand influencers. So you're like, well, podcasting, like, how do I read about a product that I love or that an advertiser wants me to talk about, give a promo code? Like, that was it. Like, we all know the host read ads and how that works. And so got into the selling of those. And that was my first foray into the podcasting business side of it. Beforehand, I used podcasting and I just listened to it, right? The next step, as you said, was I ran 3 podcast listening platforms. So for me, I was at a company that acquired apps. We were a mobile app company, and 3 of the apps we acquired were podcasts, Player FM, Breaker, and Podkicker. So when you are running a listening platform, in the day, your users caught up are hosted with you, and then you need to be distributed on Apple, Spotify, and all the other platforms. So it was working with all the hosting companies and going, look, shows hosted on your platform. How do I get that so that our listeners can find those shows? Because every podcaster wants to get the distribution and be found. And then once you did that and you set up those integrations, you're like, all right, let me go help these podcasters grow their show. So you start really realizing the 3 questions that podcasters really care about, which I came to hate, and we can dive into that. But how do I get more distribution? How do I grow my audience? And how do I monetize? And so ultimately I worked with podcasters on those 3 questions. And then my next stint, as you said, has been here with Cast Magic, head of relationships. It's an AI tool and really allows me to work with podcasters and understanding how do I take any conversation like this one and give you the ability to repurpose it and leverage that for evergreen content. I was on a conference earlier today, and people were like, why do I need 5 different LinkedIn posts based on my podcast? And I'm like, I'm so glad you asked. And we can talk about why you need 5 LinkedIn posts for your podcast. But ultimately, that's how I've gotten into the podcast space. And I love it because it's truly community driven. I mean, look at this. Like, your product is building what our service does into it. And we're still having conversations because we still realize there's so much value to talking to the community, to working together, to uplift this industry.
Yeah, for sure. So why do I need 5 different LinkedIn posts for my podcast?
So most podcasters struggle with this, and they're like, great, I recorded a conversation, I then post, and I want people to go ahead and listen to it. next week, next conversation, and I'm only posting about that. But there's so much gold that came out of that one individual conversation. So if you are struggling with what do I post every day, how do I consistently post and not try and drive people to just listen and download your episode, which goes to the third reason why I hate monetization, because most people are like, I need to drive you to listen. I need you to drive you. That's the only metric they're caring about is downloads and listens and so forth. But you have all this information that's coming from you from a conversation that's in your podcast. How do you leverage that and turn that into all these other pieces so that I may never listen to your show, but I'm always engaging with you and your content you're creating? And if you look at yourself as a brand and not just as a podcaster, a brand is able to take one piece of content and disseminate that in many different forms so that their audience is able to engage the way the audience wants it best. Whether we take a movie as an example, I may never go to the movie theaters, but I love movies. Why am I not going to spend $20+ to go to a movie theater and all the scenarios that you have about why I may not want to go to a movie theater? But I still want to stream it at home. Well, they're still taking that one IP and figuring out how they can distribute it to a user in the way the user wants it. Same exact way with the podcast. Disseminate that instead of forcing me to listen and allow me to engage with you. And that is then taking that post and thinking about how do I spread that post 5 different ways across 4 months. And that content then continues to live on instead of going like, I'm on to the next episode, I'm on to the next episode. And that's the way to think about it.
Interesting. A lot of times I thought about repurposing as different formats of the same content, right? You create a long form video and maybe some short form videos. Maybe you create a blog post and audio and some social posts and a newsletter, right? You're putting them in different formats, but they all go out the same week as that post. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about dripping those out over time. So I can see the value in giving that life over more than just the 1 week if you mass send everything out at once.
100%. And that's basically the scenario you just described is what you see most podcasters doing. It's like, all right, but why have a great conversation for 40 minutes to try and summarize that all up into a newsletter? Or, as I've said, force a person to try and go listen to that 40 minutes. Assume that they're not going to have the time to listen to it. Time is valuable. I use this example all the time. One of my favorite guys has a newsletter, comes out every Thursday, and he knows I never listen to his podcast. I should say never. Don't use definitives like that. I hardly ever listen to his podcast, but every Thursday I look forward to that newsletter. That means I'm engaging with him, not his podcast, but engaging with him, his brand, every week. So if you start thinking about how to engage with my audience and the content you're producing and not just force them to listen to that one episode, you are building time, value, and leadership with an audience.
That's why I love calling them shows a lot more than I like calling them podcasts, because once you've repurposed your content into all these different forms, a lot of people think a podcast is just audio, but it really doesn't matter. If they engage with a blog post or a newsletter, or however you can get them to engage with your content, it still counts. They're engaging with your show. How do you feel about the term show versus podcast?
I'm good with it. I mean, look, as I say, instead of calling yourself a podcaster, call yourself a brand. So if you think about it that way, it's more of like I have a recording, a part of my brand, and my brand is Podcasting Secrets, or my brand is Nathan, right? Like whatever your brand is that you stand for, you want people to engage with you. Why are you creating it? And that's the other thing. You realize most podcasters don't understand why they're creating a podcast. What is the purpose for that podcast? Is it the guest that you're bringing on? Is it the content you're creating? Is it you just want to have conversations, which is usually what most people are like, oh, I'm already having this conversation, so might as well record and put it out there. There's a reason for it. And the number one reason is usually build thought leadership so people know what I stand for, know and like me, so they engage with me. And you monetize it that way besides of sponsors and ads.
And if you go at it for that reason, there's a lot of benefits that happen as a result. And you mentioned some of those, building my brand or monetizing it. Once you're a thought leader and you have that group of people that know you, like you, and trust you, you can find all sorts of different products and services you can push into that trusted following.
100%, which goes to the third piece. How do I monetize my show? Because most podcasters are thinking about sponsors. Most are thinking about, how do I get ads? Most people don't understand a CPM, cost per thousand. So that means you need to get 1,000 downloads, or depending on how they're willing to pay for their metrics, 1,000 listens or listen times, whatever it is. But usually downloads is the case. So you can make $20. That's usually the go-to CPM. Now you can charge more and you can try and negotiate that, but there's so many other ways you can be monetizing your show.
Yeah.
Monetizing the content, the engagement, the branding, value from it that most aren't doing.
That's right. Let's go back to one of the previous comments where you talked about working for a company that bought 3 podcast listening platforms. Today, a lot of people are wanting to do paid ads to grow their podcast. So first of all, how do you feel about paid ads, and where do you feel are the best places to buy paid ads to grow a podcast following?
Funny, that was one of the ways we monetized our platforms. I've set it up, built that as a huge business. So you've got a listener who's actively downloaded a platform outside of Apple and Spotify, and they're like, I listen to podcasts. I'm going to listen to podcasts on this platform. Great. Well, hey, podcaster, I've got a dedicated audience of 2 million people that are looking and listening to podcasts. So let's go ahead and promote your show to that audience. It was incredibly successful to grow subscribers. You look at the metrics on the back end of retention. I set it up for no targeting. So I think you've got the standard Castbox, Overcast, MyBack, Player FM. Those are great platforms because it's a dedicated person. But also goes to what I go to the first question of distribution. Most podcasters are so focused on Apple, Spotify, and the big 5. Problem is, if you aggregate the other podcast platforms, that's about 20 to 30% of the market. That is a consumer who's literally said, I want something that's different than Apple and Spotify, and I'm going to go and search out for that. No different than why a person's going to host with your platform versus another platform. They're actively saying you are providing something that's different and value to me that the other guy is not doing. And the great thing is all those platforms are free. You can get distribution to all of them. And that's what I did. I would work with the hosting platforms to go hey, how do I make sure your show is hosted and distributed on our platform? So it's easy and free to go ahead and do, but most people aren't thinking about that. From the biggest piece is you really have to understand there's so much more that you can be doing, and it doesn't take a lot of effort.
Okay, so if you were going to recommend the top 3 platforms for people to buy some paid podcast advertising, where would that be?
I think people continue to see value with Player FM, Castbox, and Overcast. I think those are dedicated, built inside. But as I tell most people, do the organic stuff first. Make sure your shows are everywhere and do swaps. That still becomes a great way. I love the paid side of things that I just described because it is usually, at least for was Player FM, it's a widget, it's a button that a person can actively click to engage. If you're doing a swap, going hey, let's say Nathan, I came on your show, you came on my show, and I'm going to talk about here's a great other podcasting. A person has to take an action. Remember that show and then go write it down and look at it. If you are making it easy for a person, one click inside an app and they're able to add that podcast or discover that podcast, that is an easier lift. And that's why I find those ways are successful. Other platforms, I think Mopod, oh my God, I'm blanking on. Amaze Media has a platform. Those are different. Those are larger volume and they're not dedicated inside a listening platform. I've heard successful things from them. I've never used or tested them, so I can't speak to that. But
right,
my biggest one is it's a platform, native. That's going to be your best place.
We mentioned that you've spoken at various podcasting conferences. If a podcaster could only go to 1 or 2 podcasting conferences a year, which ones do you think are the best that you'd recommend?
Podcast Movement by far.
Yeah.
I think from the breadth of content and the tracks that they're covering, from the breadth of people that are attending, whether they're industry people like yourself and I, or they're new podcasters that are trying to learn the trade, to experienced podcasters, you're going to find a boatload knowledge, networks, and connections. And the joys about that event is maybe it's overwhelming. I'm even overwhelmed at it, right? But
Yeah.
we're in the podcast space, and most podcasters, whether you're an introvert or extrovert, enjoy talking about their show. So if nothing else, you have so many people to go up to and what's your show? Breaking the ice. You don't know how to break the ice at an event? Great. What is your podcast? What is your show? As you said, what is your brand? And people will gladly talk about that. And then you ask them the same question. You're like, oh, now we can start. What mics do you use? What hosting platform? It all opens up the conversation. That's what I love about the event. But you've got so many ways to learn. And then your standard conference and sense of sponsors and parties, and it's fun.
You've been in this industry and worked with a whole bunch of different podcasters. What's one big mistake that you've seen made, either by yourself or somebody else, that we could learn from?
Trying to be too polished. I guess that would be it, right? So the joys about the medium of podcasting is it's a conversation. The host is going to screw up. They're going to naturally make mistakes. The guest is going to. The joys of editing is there, but sometimes you leave that editing in there, not so that you embarrass the other person, right? We never want that, but that's the joys of these conversations. They're meant to be had, and they're free flowing. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is remember, you don't have to be perfect. There is also the vulnerability of imperfection. And that's kind of why your audience comes to you. They want to know who you are. It's you can't be perfect. That is a persona that doesn't exist. And we always see when that persona bursts because, wow, that person I thought was perfect. It's no, there's humanity in that. That's why I love Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley as a basketball player always says I am not a role model. The way he talks, the way he acts, but he is a role model, but he's a role model to those people that find him that kind of persona. They want that, that's you're never going to be perfect to everyone. So find your niche and be vulnerable.
Yeah, I love that. The authenticity, the power that comes from that. Love it. I'm a big Charles Barkley fan as well. I grew up in the Phoenix area when he played for the Suns and almost beat Michael Jordan in the finals there. I was sure a fun, wild ride with him.
I'm from Chicago, so I remember those games.
You were on the winning side.
Yes.
Tell me about one of the biggest challenges that you've seen people face in the podcasting world and how they overcome that.
Challenges? I mean, that's pod fade is the number one everyone talks about. It's wow, there's so much work that goes into producing a show, whether it's the pre-production, the guesting, the post-production, the editing, the posting, all that stuff. Everyone's just overwhelmed. The joys in the last year and a half, 2 years is now we have tools and platforms like yours and mine where it's we can start taking a lot of that work out of the manual need and make it easier. Because look, everyone that's listening here, if you're a podcaster, unless your business is I'm a podcast production company and that is my core, but if you were a podcaster, most likely that is not your day job. You are doing so much more. So to invest in the art and the value of podcasting outside of your normal day job, that requires a lot of effort. So how do we make it that it is easy for you, that there's valuable insights that you're getting from it, and it finds it useful for you? And if you're not focused on metrics like downloads, and you're not looking at how do I just grow my show, you're looking at all the other value pieces that come from podcasting becoming a brand, then you realize, oh, I'll do this every week. I'll produce all that content. It goes back to our earlier conversation about why do I need 5 LinkedIn posts? Well, maybe you batch recorded, or maybe you're you don't have content. You're I don't know what to put out. You've got all that old content that you can go ahead and post. You're not worried about, I need a new episode. No, you just need content so that you can continue to engage, because 5 months later, I don't remember what Nathan and Greg talked about on Podcasting Secrets, but you can source the content from that episode and continue to post it 5 months later. So those are key pieces that I think that podcasters are too focused on that metric that they're missing, and therefore they fade out.
You've talked numerous times here about creating a brand. I've talked to some people who have some concerns about a brand, right? They may feel like they're just small and they just want a voice and that they're not big enough for a brand. Or you may talk to a CEO who feels like him becoming a brand is maybe arrogant, or the celebrity CEO is something, that may be an inappropriate thing for him to seek after. Why would podcasters need a brand. I agree with you. I think it's really important, but help explain why that's something that we should overcome.
I mean, why'd you start the recording in the first place? Let's go back to the core. Why am I starting a podcast? Because I have something I want to say, or I want to give people a platform to say that. Well, then if that's the case, becoming a brand allows you to A, let you speak what you want to share, or B, allow you to repurpose what your guests are coming on and give them the platform. So if you really start thinking about why am I doing this, that's a core piece. The imposter syndrome, we all have imposter syndrome. If you are trying to compare yourself to, I don't know, Joe Rogan, let's use him as the example. I always start there. It's like everyone podcasts like, oh, I want to be the next Joe Rogan. Or maybe you don't want to be the next Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan started off as a comedian in the 80s in New York. He was getting booed off stage. He was getting crickets, like all the things. It took him time to grow his craft, right? So like, why do I want to build a brand? Well, not to be Joe Rogan, but so that people know, like, and trust me. And people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And so why are you creating this platform, this brand, besides, like, let's go back to Charles Barkley. Charles wanted to upset everyone, which he's done. Right? He still has an audience. That's kind of his brand. We go back to Joe. That's his brand. Joe Rogan. You know who Joe Rogan's audience is, and anyone else that's anti-Joe Rogan, he doesn't care about you. So creating a brand is all about finding your niche, finding an audience that likes what you have to say. And if you feel you have nothing to say, then I don't know why you got into podcasting, because you clearly have something you value, you want to say. So there's that. But you don't have to be the biggest thing. You just have to let your voice be heard. And also then remember, you have value. You have something of value to share. Every one of us does. And so you are doing a disservice to yourself, but also another person if you don't share that message. We can go down a mental health path here and go, look, whatever mental health challenges I'm having, by me speaking that, by me allowing other people to know about that, allows other people to go, I'm not alone. I'm feeling what this other person's feeling. You're creating connection, which is what I love about podcasting. It creates a connection, community, and going like, I like what Nathan is building. I like what Nathan has to say. I'm going to connect and not maybe listen to everything Nathan has to say, but I'll read it or I'll consume it, or I like him. I feel I know Nathan. He's speaking a way that relates to me. That's all you're doing when you're building a brand. Instead of building a downloadable podcast, you're building something that lives beyond just a listen.
And as I share those points of specificity, and maybe share a mental health challenge or share a passion or a hobby or an outdoor activity that I love to do or something about my family, it creates more connection points that gives more opportunities for people to connect with me. If I snowboard and someone else snowboards, it creates a connection opportunity that would not have been there if I wouldn't have shared that specifically.
100%.
What do you think is the greatest secret sauce that successful podcasters are doing that less successful podcasters are not doing?
I think the biggest, if we're talking just like you and I are as an interview-based show, what I find good podcaster hosts are doing is breaking the fourth wall. And breaking the fourth wall is, instead of right now everyone listening to us, just two people talking, they're like, I'm a fly in this conversation between Greg and Nathan. We're going like, hold on, let's decompress and understand what was just said. And let's bring everyone into that conversation. So good hosts are able to process on the fly with their guests and their audience, instead of going like, all right, what's the next question? What's the next question? Then it just feels like I'm listening to an interview, as opposed to, oh, I feel like I understand the host more. I feel like I'm part of that show. I am a part of this community, as opposed to, I just listen to this and I'm less likely to give feedback to the host, because I can go like, oh, that was a great question, as opposed to, yes, that was me too. I felt that too, or I believe that too. You want people to relate to that. And by breaking the fourth wall, you're doing that. And for those who aren't familiar, breaking the fourth wall is literally, I'm bringing you right now in. Like, that is literally me breaking the wall, going and talking to you as an audience, as opposed to I'm only having a conversation here with Nathan.
Yeah, for sure. And helping them feel that they were part of that conversation too, not just listening to two other people having a conversation. Greg, thank you for joining me today. Thanks for adding so much value for our audience. If our audience has enjoyed this, like I have, and they want to learn more about you and your products and services, what are the best ways for them to do that?
As of right now, LinkedIn's the best way. That's where I live. So please follow me, connect with me. I truly believe, you'll go to my page, it says life is about time and relationships. Truly believe that life is about time and relationships. You have no clue where one conversation today is going to take you. Would never imagine when you and I, Nathan, connected that our conversations would lead to today and so forth and support in the industry. You don't know what you don't know. So be open to the possibility. So please reach out. Let me know what you felt of this show, what you felt of me. I'm happy to connect and talk about all things beyond just podcasting.
And you can shamelessly pitch Cast Magic too. Tell us a little bit more about your product and how they can find out more about that too.
So Cast Magic, like I said, turns any conversation, so not just podcasting, but events, meetings, sales calls, and we allow you then to turn that into multiple blocks of content, whether it's automatically created by us or you get to choose your own prompts and build it from there. Once again, content repurposing is the name of the game. Alex Hormozi, Gary Vee, they all are on that boat. This is why they've all been successful. I'm just here to help with Cast Magic, being able to give you a platform to do so.
Yeah, and if they want to learn more about Cast Magic, maybe get a free trial, how do they do that?
For your listeners, you can get a free trial by using the promo code PODMAGIC, PODMAGIC, all capitals. It'll give you a month free, and then go to castmagic.io.
Sounds great. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nathan.
And my key takeaways from today's episode are, number one, podcasters should focus on building a brand rather than just creating a podcast, as it allows for a wider audience engagement. Number two, repurposing podcast content into multiple formats, such as social media posts and newsletters, can significantly extend its reach and lifespan. Number three, monetization strategies for podcasts should go beyond seeking sponsors and ads, exploring other value creation opportunities. Number four, distribution across various podcast platforms, not just major ones like Apple and Spotify, can help reach more diverse audiences. Number five, authenticity and imperfection in podcasting can create stronger connections with listeners than striving for polish. Number six, understanding the purpose behind creating a podcast is crucial for long-term success and motivation. Number seven, breaking the fourth wall by addressing the audience directly can enhance listener engagement and community building. Number eight, podcasters should focus on creating value and connections rather than solely on metrics like download numbers. Number nine, overcoming imposter syndrome is important for podcasters to confidently share their unique perspectives and experiences. And finally, number 10, leveraging AI tools for content repurposing can help podcasters save time and expand their content strategy. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Podcasting Secrets. I wish you success as you continue to grow your podcast. And if you're looking for an amazing podcast platform, one that integrates together more than 35 different modules and is leveraging the power of AI, I recommend you check out PodUp. You can get a free trial of PodUp at podup.com.